Today, we are comparing 8 different kinds of acrylic markers. This is a long one, but if you're interested in how all of these different markers perform, this will be a very useful video for you. I demo all of them, I do swatches, and I'm drawing the same painting 8 different times with all of these markers, so you can see a very clear comparison between them. I'll go over the pricing of each set, the pros and cons, what I think of them, what I think their best use cases are, and hopefully this will help you narrow down your choices for what acrylic marker set you want to buy. Also, a quick disclaimer, I reached out to all of the marker brands that I was interested in reviewing in this video to see if they wanted to send me a pack free of charge. So all of these marker sets are gifted to me, but they didn't tell me to say anything particular about the markers. Everything you're hearing is completely my own opinion. I told them I was going to be very honest, and if I don't like something, you will know. So sit back, maybe grab your sketchbook, and let's compare some markers. So, of course, the first marker that I wanted to talk about was the Arrtx acrylic markers, specifically the 90 set. This set comes in at about $60 US, which is about 66 cents per marker. And there's a new packaging now where it's more of a square box, but I have the old packaging. Arrtx is that really popular brand of acrylic markers that you're seeing all over the place on Instagram because they are known for gifting their sets to artists for reviews. The first set of theirs that I tried was the 60 set. Now this is the 90 set, and I was actually pleasantly surprised at the increase in color variety in the 90 set. I find usually in acrylic marker sets, they are missing some extremely light colors and some extremely dark colors. There's a lot of midtones. And a lot of the smaller sets of markers I find are more pale, and I find a lot of these sets have very similar colors to each other. But at least with the Arrtx 90 set, I really had an easy time color matching to my digital mock-up. That being said, Arrtx does need to make some more even darker colors and some lighter colors because we are missing that contrast overall. And I'll be saying this about every single set on this list. One thing I will say is once you get the Arrtx markers, the first thing you'll notice is that the brush tips are pretty nice to use. I find that the brush tips hold up pretty well. There are some markers on this list where the brush tips do not hold up well and they disintegrate pretty easily, but I find the Arrtx ones to be pretty solid, and the ink flow is pretty solid as well. There are some brushes on this list where I just could not get the ink flowing and it was extremely frustrating, but these ones work right away. They're pre-primed. You don't need to worry about it. So the ink flows pretty well, but there is not a lot of it. There's not a lot of ink in these markers. They don't last that long, honestly. And I wish that they would have refills. I think that would be really great. Or if they took this exact color line and switched to more of an ink reservoir kind of system where there's like a window in the marker and you can see how much ink is left. Or I should be saying paint, but I'm probably going to say ink. And I got really curious about how their marker works and the construction of the barrel. And it just so happened that I had a marker that was dried up. I could not get it to work, so I took the marker apart. And this is what it looks like inside the Arrtx marker. As you can see, a lot of the space where you think there might be ink is kind of empty, and it's mostly a sponge that is soaked in the paint. So I think the sponge prevents the ink from just like freely flowing out of the marker. It sort of like slows the flow. But the downside is that there is not a lot of ink in these markers. I ended up finding that color in my other set and just put it on the swatch board, but I couldn't get that one working and it is a dud. These markers dry down pretty matte, but on their darkest color, like 47, for instance, there is a bit of a sheen. I found this happened with some other brands as well. On their darkest colors, they had a sheen almost as if you used like a ballpoint pen. Like, you know, when you use a dark blue ballpoint pen and when it shines, it sort of has this like purple shine to it. It's sort of like that. And also the silver leaked on my hand, as you just saw. So I did all the swatches. Maybe this will give you a good idea of the color range in this set. I anticipated there would be a lot of duplicate colors, and I think there is, but there's also a lot of variety because there are 90 colors, but I do find a lot of them are similar to each other and almost redundant. Like some of the blues look similar, some of the yellows look similar, and I wish there were more brown tones and more dark colors, like I mentioned. In this set, the stickers and labels came separate, so I had to apply those myself. and then I reorganized it in a color order that I found useful. Then I wanted to do a mileage test with one of the markers. I just chose a green one, and I just started scribbling on a piece of paper just to take a brand new fresh marker and see how much ink I can get out of it. And as you can see, it's already struggling. So I wouldn't recommend these for large illustrations. Do not buy these if you're going to be doing purely acrylic marker illustrations. I mainly use these to add little details on top of my sketches in my sketchbook. That's how I use them. And this set is $60. So is it worth it to get a set just for doing little details and touch-ups? I think that's not the worst deal. These aren't like the most expensive markers ever. There are some markers on this list that are $8 a marker, and for good reason. So I think these are a decent budget option if you're just wanting to play around and just like step into the acrylic marker world. Plus, Arrtx is always coming out with new markers. I'm excited to see what they have in store for the future for possibly a bigger color range with more ink per marker and maybe like a refill system. That would be really cool. So I found with the stress test, once I would start coloring a lot, it would dry up, and when I left it to sit upside down, it would sort of like refill itself because the ink moves down with gravity and then you can color more with it. So yeah, it's best to not have like a gigantic area that you need to fill with the ink, because you might need to like let it sort of, the ink pass back down to the tip of the marker before you continue. And just then I did a dark paper test. It's sort of like an absorbent watercolor paper, and you can sort of see how they do on that type of paper. Most of these markers will do just fine on like a non-absorbent surface in terms of like showing up on a dark background. You can draw on a really smooth paper surface and they'll probably appear more opaque, but I wanted to test it on this more absorbent watercolor black paper that I had, and I sort of tested them all on that paper so you can see how opaque they are. But now we are working on the painting and seeing how I can make all these colors come together, how they work together in a finished piece, any struggles that I had, things like that. I found it pretty easy to color match to my digital mockup. I was able to find a similar color to each shade that I needed. And I also had a good time using the brush nibs because I was able to get thin lines and thick lines and get into these small details, small areas. And I had a good time doing this drawing, but as I keep going and keep testing the markers, I start to get tired of coloring the same thing over and over and over. But I'm doing it for science, so I hope you will enjoy. I think a good benchmark to compare markers with each other is to look at their lightest colors and see how opaque they are. And as you can see, as I'm working on this painting, some of the lightest tan colors are not very opaque at all. They feel really watery, and it's hard to get a opaque laydown of color. I find the white is pretty good, but some of the like tan off-white colors are not. That was my experience with this set. A lot of the turquoise colors are really nice. I really enjoy them. I wish there were some even darker colors, and by dark I mean colors that are closer to black, like really dark colors. That would be nice to see in the future. I have a feeling that dark colors are harder to make or more expensive to make because you need more pigment and it probably just costs more, and I think that's why these brands don't make the really dark colors, or maybe they're more geared towards the everyday person, not someone that's going to need like a bunch of different specific shades in really dark colors to contrast with their illustrations. But I think it would be to the benefit of everyone to have more dark colors and more pale pastel colors. We have a lot of midtones. We need some more variety in the lights and darks and the values. And you can see a comparison between my digital colored mockup and the final Arrtx painting. And I had a lot of fun with this one. I think I would overall recommend the markers if you take into account everything that I said. The next marker I want to talk about are the Enmi acrylic markers. I have the 60 set, and on their website it's $59.99 USD, so that's about $1 a marker. If you want to get the 80 set, it's $75.99, so that's 95 cents a marker. They're more expensive than the Arrtx 90 set, but they do have more ink in them from what I can tell. Even though they do have more ink, the color laydown didn't feel as consistent as the Arrtx ones. I found it harder to control the fine details. I think maybe because they're just juicier. Some of these markers are better for smaller scale paintings, some are better for larger ones, just because of the intricate details you can get. So you'll notice the painting for the Enmi colors is a little bit like less refined, less polished looking. That's just because of the way the markers behaved. And these are the kinds of markers that you have to shake, but they are a brush nib, which is my favorite kind of nib for acrylic markers. I just feel like they're the most natural way of laying down acrylic paint. So I appreciate the brush nib a lot, and I appreciate the fact that you have to shake them, because this means that the ink inside the barrel is flowing and it's loose. It's not trapped in a sponge, because sponges take up space that could otherwise be filled with ink. The one downside is that, it's a little inconvenient to have to shake your markers, and if the ink is flowing in the barrel, there's a chance it can separate. And I noticed this happening with some other brands on this list, where I would leave the markers sitting horizontally as they recommend, but then when I open it up and take the cap off, I noticed there's like a split in color, so it's like lighter on the top of the marker and darker on the bottom. I didn't notice that with the Enmi ones, but I noticed it with the Tooli markers the most. And it kind of looks like on the swatch card here that their color laydown is a little bit streaky. But the difference between this swatch card and the Arrtx one is that this is not really an absorbent surface. It's very smooth, almost like a vellum plasticky texture. So you can see exactly how the ink just like sits on top of it. I feel like if I colored on a more absorbent paper surface like I did with the Arrtx ones or some other markers in this video, the color would look a little bit smoother because it sort of settles into the paper. But the Enmi swatch card is smooth, so it sits on top of the paper, if that makes sense. And if you don't shake the marker well, the tips can feel dry. It's important to let the ink flow, and for best results with markers that you have to shake, you should shake them after they've been sitting for a while. Shake them really well. And if you notice you don't hear the ball like sliding back and forth inside the barrel of the marker, you can sort of like whack it against your hand or against a desk and like try to free the ball inside the marker, so you can get a good like stir going inside the marker when you shake it. I also found that the Enmi marker nibs are not as sturdy as the Arrtx ones. They didn't really last as long as the Arrtx ones to a certain degree. When you get a new marker, especially brush tips, as you use it, it will lose its point a little bit depending on what kind of paper you're using. So if you notice that your marker tip is really fragile, it's probably best to use it on smooth paper rather than rough paper, because rough paper is going to act like sandpaper for your marker and make the tip of the felt tip brush sort of get all feathery and lose its point and become blunt. And I noticed this happening with the Enmi markers, so that's probably why they wanted you to do the swatches on a smooth piece of paper, because maybe these work better on smooth paper. So that's one thing to consider. With a lot of acrylic markers, sometimes you gotta use a smoother surface. It helps the ink flow better. But I wanted to test all these out on a rougher, mixed media, more absorbent paper. I think this is actually hot press watercolor paper. Basically, watercolor paper is pretty sturdy. It can also be rough for more fragile marker nibs. Once these markers are dry, I find they have a pretty matte appearance, except for a couple of colors like B5 and BR1 is pretty shiny. And there's a couple of semi-gloss ones like GY2. And I'm just looking at the swatch card here, and it sort of seems like the darker the color, the more chance there is of it being kind of shiny. But the light ones are really matte. I find this set is missing dark colors even more than some other sets. But the one thing I appreciated about this set was that they feel very juicy. They don't feel like they dry out quickly like the Arrtx set. I do prefer the Arrtx nibs, but I like this ink system better. And I think the Arrtx 90 set had a lot more color variety. That makes sense because there's 90 of them. There's only 60 in the Enmi pack. I would be very curious to try the 80 pack. I think Enmi offers 80. Yeah, I think that's their largest set. That would be interesting to try, to see if the color differences, if they get some darker ones, some more in-betweens. I'm not sure if I would recommend the Arrtx over the Enmi set. I like how with the Arrtx set, I feel like I can get finer details. The Enmi brush tips feel a little bit more blunt compared to them. But if I could have the Arrtx ones with this ink system, with the loose ink inside the barrel, I think that would be a perfect combination. but then they would probably be more expensive like the envy ones because they contain more ink per marker if they were built this way. So the Arrtx is more affordable because there's not as much ink, and the envy is more expensive, but the nib isn't as nice. That's sort of my takeaway comparing those two sets to each other. They're very similar otherwise. When I'm comparing the final envy painting to the first Arrtx one, I do notice it's more blobby, less refined details, less specific colors because it's a smaller color set. I also could have just been rushing it. I don't think I was like rushing it that much. I think I was just struggling to get as fine a detail. Might be better if I did it a little bigger. I just noticed that the envy one is less refined than some of the other finished pieces. Next is a brand that was very interesting to me. A viewer asked me if I could try to review these ones in this video, so I reached out to Tooli and they sent me over their jewel color set and a essential brush set. And one interesting thing about this company is that they do their colors differently. The colors are specific to each pack, so each pack will have like certain numbers, like this first one I think has 24 colors in the jewel set, so they're numbered 1 to 24, and then you can get a different set that would be like all the reds, all the greens, or like all the pastels or skin tones, and the colors will still be numbered like 1 to 24. They don't have universal colors, it's sort of like set specific colors, and they come in brushed nibs and bullet nibs in lots of different thicknesses, which is pretty cool that you can get a diverse range of thicknesses and types of nibs, which is pretty cool. You can also purchase replacement nibs for their pens, which is awesome, and they included replacement nibs, which is always greatly appreciated because you can protect your markers as delicately as you like, but they will inevitably wear out over time, so replacing the nib is an awesome thing to be able to do. They basically have 5 different types of sets. You can get the Essential series, the Pro series, the Special series, the Studio, and the Acrylic Brush series. And they have Studio ones, which are just like a different selection of like a nice color palette. They have Special ones, which would be like pastel, darks, skin tones, and the Pro, which you can get like all the greens, all the yellows, all the reds. And they have Essential sets, which is just like good mixes of colors. I do find it a little confusing, like what the difference is. I think it's just like which combination of colors are offered and the types of nibs. Also have some sets that have double ends, and I wish I got the double end set. I found it hard to get fine details because of the sets that I chose. I was basically limited to brush tips that honestly, I'm not a big fan of their brush nibs. I'll be honest, if I was to get more Tooli ones, I would probably go for the bullet nibs because I do really like their bullet nibs. But I wish I got finer point nibs for this illustration because it would have been easier to get the fine details. So as you can see, their bullet nib pens, you have to prime them, and it's a good idea to shake them and then burp the pen, which is when you turn it like nib side up and kind of like press it down to release excess air, and then you can prime it and draw with it, and you have to shake them before use. One thing I found with their bullet nibs though is that when you leave this set out for like a day or longer and they're laying on their side as recommended, I find the color splits in half, so like the top of the marker will be light and the bottom will be darker, and it's sort of like a two-tone situation, and you have to shake it and color on a scrap piece of paper to get rid of that. So I have started to store mine tip down, and that sort of helped the problem, although it's not always recommended to store markers tip down, but I was talking to their support and I think they recommended I try doing that to have a more even settling of the color, and I would recommend shaking it beforehand. So for pricing, the jewel pack, the first one I tried, the 3mm, is $47.99 Canadian or $34.81 USD, which is $1.45 per marker. And the brush set is $45.99 Canadian or $33.36 USD, 93 cents per marker. So the brush ones are a lot cheaper, but they have less ink in them because it's not the kind of marker you have to shake. And the nib ones are more expensive, but I suspect they have more ink in them as well. I would just recommend getting not their brush tip markers just because I don't like the brush nib. I find it wears out really fast, but the bullet nib is pretty good. I did a couple of demos on my phone just to show you what I'm talking about with the nib wearing out and the split color. The split color isn't as bad as I thought it was. Maybe it was like an initial problem that kind of went away. But you can tell the difference between a marker that I used and a marker that I didn't use, where the one I didn't use still is a fine point, but the one I did use is quite frayed. It gets more frayed than the other brands. So I wouldn't recommend the brush markers. They just don't feel very juicy or anything like that. If they had a loose ink system, they might be better, but I would recommend getting the nib ones, the bullet nib ones. I haven't tried their fine ones. I've only tried the 3mm nib, so that's what I'm speaking to today. Now time to start the illustration, and I had to color match to the best of my ability. I feel like I had a lot of colors at my disposal, but my final piece, I'm not a big fan of it. I just found it really hard to get fine details. With the markers that I chose, it's not necessarily Tooli's fault, although the brush tips wear out almost instantly, as I put in my notes. They don't feel very good quality, the brush nibs, but I do like the bullet nibs and I like the ink inside the bullet marker. My notes also say that they have a stronger smell than some of the other markers, and there's a slight sheen on the really dark colors, but other than that, they are very matte. I really enjoyed the jewel set and all of the dark earthy colors that are in that set. I do wish they were a bit darker, but it was nice to have a bit more contrast than some of the other sets. I think I found this set to have the darkest blue out of all of them. Like, they had this one really dark blue that I enjoyed using for some contrast on the blueberries. But I do wish they went a little bit darker. Like, I wish they had a set that was like Jewel version 2 with colors that are even darker and closer to black. That would be nice. I would also love to try out their pastels and just like try out a lot, like more variety of their colors in order to get a better sense of like the full scope of this brand. I'm intrigued by their supposedly like over 470 color variety in their range. Like, I'm wondering like how similar are the colors, because they're not named specifically. Like, you know how say with Copic alcohol markers, you'll have like B00, B000, and like B0, B1, and those are all like different shades of the same blue. And there's different sets within the Copic universe, but those colors repeat themselves within various sets. With the Tooli sets, it's not like that. It's like the colors are named according to whatever set they're in. So I don't know if there are duplicates, but there might be similar colors that aren't exactly the same. So it would be really interesting to try out, first of all, the smaller nibs and a wider color range so that I can really like do these justice, because that was one of the main appeals with the Tooli brand for me, was just how many colors they advertise having. And the fact that you can change the nibs is nice as well. Also, I don't know if their extra fine nibs would be my favorite kind of nib. I think I could get them to work, but their extra fine nibs are the plasticky nibs. And I have tried this type of nib in some of the other sets in this video. The Ohuhu acrylic marker set that comes with bold and fine, and also the Molotow set has the plasticky nibs, and the Copic Acrea set. So I'm not a huge fan of the plasticky nibs. I much prefer the felt tip nibs that I'm using in this video, the ones that are yellow at first. Sometimes they're white, and it's sort of like a spongy, fabricy, absorbent type of nib, but the plasticky ones sort of just let the ink flow down the tip, and I find they're prone to getting clogged and they're prone to like splattering on the page. But I want to try out Tooli's because not all nibs are built the same way. They're all different, and I think it would be really great to try out some more of the Tooli markers because I am intrigued. I like the ink. I just had a hard time getting details in this particular painting, as you can see with the close-ups. Also, the background looks pretty streaky. I used a brush nib for the background, but for a lot of the more solid-looking areas, that was definitely not the brush nib, it was the bullet nib. So go for the bullet nib. It has more ink and it's just easier to control. Now for the Ohuhu Nahuku acrylic marker set. It comes with 24 colors. They are brush nib, but they are shakeable and they have a little ink reservoir. You can see how much ink is left in the marker. They come in this handy little carrying case. They are labeled specifically per marker, so I assume if they expand this range, they will add to the number system. I actually really like these markers. I think the ink is really juicy, but the brush nibs can hold their shape for finer details. One thing I found is that some of the lighter colors aren't very opaque. I found this in a lot of the sets though. but they are pretty good. Like, they do the job. My only wish is that there were more colors in this set because 24 is pretty limiting, but the ones they give you cover a lot of bases. I particularly like the dark brown that it came with, and mixing it with the black gave me a nice deeper brown color. You have to get a little creative with these more limiting color sets by mixing colors on the page and blending them and sort of making them work like actual acrylic paint. And it was pretty fun to use some of the more limited sets and try to expand the color range by doing my own mixing. I find this set has a pretty consistent satin finish. The dark colors are a little more satiny, but the light ones are satin as well, sort of like a semi-gloss look. I actually really enjoy the way they look when they dry down. They just have this like nice appearance. I don't know how to explain it. It just feels like, it just looks appealing to my eyes. But if you like your acrylic markers to dry super matte, these are not the markers for you. On their website, the 24 pack is currently $29.99, and that is $1.25 per marker. They actually have a 48 set as well, which is pretty exciting. I wish I had the 48 set. And that is $44.99, which rounds up to 94 cents per marker, which is a really great deal for these, honestly. I think that's an awesome price. Less than $1, and they're really juicy and have a nice nib. I think that's a good deal. I would definitely make sure you shake these before using. The ink can separate inside the barrel and around the nib, but if you shake them really good and draw a little small circle on a scrap piece of paper, you can get the color back to where it's supposed to be. And I find these have more of a chemical smell, but not too bad. And a cosmetic detail I noticed is that on the outside of the barrel, some of the white paint can chip away. So it's not like the best construction on like the outside like label of the barrel, but it doesn't impact the usability of the marker. Because the brush nibs hold up so well on these ones, I found it a lot easier to get fine details. This is how a brush nib is supposed to feel for me. And when I'm comparing the way this one looks to other ones, it definitely has more details, although not as detailed as the sets that have finer nibs, as you'll see later on. There's not really much I can say about this set other than it was a pretty pleasant experience using them. I just wish there were more colors, but now there's a 48 set, so that would be pretty interesting to see how they expanded the color range and if there are any darker ones. I think the 48 set uses their new naming conventions, so it's hard to tell if they have any identical colors, but it does look like they have an extra dark brown that's a little more reddish, and it looks like they have a couple extra grays. Apparently it comes with 3 blacks and 3 white markers. I don't know why there would be 3 of each. So it's 42 colors, 3 black, 3 white. It's nice to include extra white colors because I guess you can go through those pretty fast. It looks like they have a darker green as well, and a couple darker blues and a darker purple and a couple more like in between colors. It looks like more of a complete set. There's also a more yellow ochre looking color, so I wish I had this set to test for you, but I'm testing the 24 set, and the one they currently sell on their website uses the old naming conventions. So for instance, a color that looks pretty similar in the 24 set is called Y30, but the color that looks similar in the other one is Y71. Another example is G41 is now G09. I don't know if that's the same color, but they're sort of named differently. White is 101, 120. And on this set, white is white and black is black. So the naming is a bit different. I know Ohuhu recently changed how they label their markers to allow for like more specific naming conventions, so you know exactly what kind of color it is. So that's cool, but it's a different system than the one I am currently using in this video. In all of their listing photos, you can see the area above the brush nib where it's this clear area that sort of has this like spiral looking thing. In my markers, that sort of has paint all over it and inside of it, and I don't know if that's supposed to be happening. Like the paint is sort of getting in the cracks in that area, and you can see it a lot in like this light green color. It's not really getting on my hands too much, like it's not leaking outside of the marker, it's just sort of like dripping down into that little area. I don't know if that's supposed to happen, but it is happening, so that's one thing to consider, I guess. And I don't think it's leaking out of that area, but it does sort of pool at the end of the marker near the nib. I notice with the colors that I use most often, you can see inside the cap, it kind of has a lot of dried ink, and the ink kind of makes its way up to that area, and you end up with ink on your fingers for some of the colors. I'm not sure what's causing this. I think there's just so much ink in these pens that it kind of like escapes out of the nib. It's not like a full-on leak, but I think when you cap the marker and take the cap off, it kind of like transfers ink during that process. Like maybe it rubs off. I find with all of these marker brands, the actual ink inside the pen does not match the lid very well. And I think the only brand that I've seen do a really good job of this is Copic. I feel like their acrylic markers, which I'll talk about later, they match pretty well to what is promised on the pen cap, as well as their alcohol markers I find were always pretty accurate. And I wish it was something that marker companies took a little more care into so that you know exactly what the marker will look like. Then again, it's probably really hard to match the color with a different material that isn't the same as the ink. Like the lid is made out of a different material than the paint. So it's probably hard to do this. And also, I think the Copic markers, the alcohol markers, weren't completely accurate either, because I remember I made custom labels for the outsides of my markers to stick on the outside, and I colored them in so I knew exactly what the color would look like. But I feel like some of these brands are just so off. Like if they were a little bit closer to how they look inside, that would be nice. I do remember when I was using this set, I had a lot of fun blending the colors in the leaves. Because it was a limited color palette, I had to get creative and really blend them all together. And you kind of do this by alternating colors. So you put down a little light blue, put down a little light green, blend them together, add a little bit of the other color, and it's a lot of switching back and forth, but I think the end result is really nice. I think the colors that came with this set just lent themselves really nicely to the particular piece that I wanted to paint. And some of the other sets, the final piece might not look as nice as other ones. Like you might prefer certain sets over the others, not because the markers are better, but because the color selection was different and just ended up looking nicer. So I think it's more important to look at how the ink behaves. How do the details look? Are they opaque enough? Are they easy to blend? Does a nib hold up well? Is it good value for what you're paying? Like, do you get a lot of ink in that marker? So don't just look at the final pieces to make your opinion. It's more about the process and how they feel when you're using them. But then again, there is something to be said about the colors available for different brands, because some brands don't have a lot of colors available, while others have tons of colors available. So color might be more of a factor for some brands than others. But I will say I really enjoyed using these markers. They stood out to me. I would definitely recommend this set. I might recommend the 48 set, although I haven't tried it myself. Just keep in mind that the lightest colors aren't the most opaque, and the ink can get a little messy in the cap. Okay, I have to talk about the Copic Acrea acrylic markers. These are some of the first new markers that Copic has released in a really long time, and I was so excited when they sent these to me. At first they were okay, but honestly, the ink just doesn't come out of the pen for me. I just can't get them to work properly, and I think one of the biggest reasons is that they're meant to be for smooth surfaces. I find much more success using these on a smooth piece of paper than on a rough, more watercolor paper. Even then, they have a really inconsistent ink flow, and if you use them once and come back to them a few days later, you'll find it's dried inside the nib and it won't come out. And I tried to remedy this by soaking it in like alcohol and warm water, rinsing it under the tap, washing the nib. It did not fix the issue. I don't know what the problem is. The only issue I have with these markers is the nib. I think the ink is really great. It's actually quite opaque, and the color matches the cap pretty well, and I feel like their color range is already really solid. I really like what they have so far. It's just the nib. The nib is not good. I really don't like them. They don't work very well for me. I've seen other artists get them to work. For me, they don't. So I had to use a completely different technique for this painting. So it's going to look a lot different from the rest of them. What I did, and you'll see it soon, I printed out my sketch or line art onto my smooth alcohol marker paper. And I used alcohol markers to do the base coloring, and then I used the Copic Acrea acrylic markers to do details on top. But you'll see that later. I'm still trying to get them to work. I'm trying my best, desperately trying to fill in the background, which doesn't really go over very well with such a small nib and such a large area to fill. I really feel like these would go best on top of alcohol marker pieces where you've done it on really smooth marker paper and you use these markers to accentuate the details and to like add little highlights. I think that would be a great way to use these. And once I switched to the smooth paper, I had a much better time with them. But I don't really use smooth paper like that very often. I don't really use alcohol markers very often. It was actually pretty refreshing to break them out. I unfortunately sold my Copic marker collection years ago because I got them in like 2012 or 2013, and I hadn't touched them for like years and years and years, and I was like, okay, maybe it's time to sell these. And recently I've just been kind of missing them, but luckily I have a set of Ohuhu acrylic markers. Ohuhu alcohol markers. So I did the coloring with them and it was really fun. Honestly, I think I should try to bring them back. I've been kind of collecting Copic markers again, like Copic alcohol markers. And once I finish up with the alcohol marker coloring stage, I go in with the Copic Acrea just to add details, to add some lines, to bring it into focus a little bit. And once I switched to this paper, they definitely behaved a lot better than before. I don't know if I would still recommend them in good faith, just because I've just experienced how finicky they are. I feel like Copic should really look into their nibs, try to switch it up to something different, maybe a brush nib. I think they could engineer something like that. If you are interested though, they come in 4 different packs with different colors in each pack, or you can buy a full set of all 24 colors. I'm looking it up on Michaels Canada and it's $116.99 for all 24 colors, making them $84.66 USD or $3.53 per marker approximately. I'm just going off of Michael's price. So these are not cheap markers. I think their ink is really nice quality. I will say it is extremely opaque. They are all very matte. They're all very consistent. It just feels really nice, and the construction of the barrel of the marker just feels really nice as well. It's just the nibs that I have a problem with. And it could be a me problem because these do have good reviews online, but I was looking up the issue that I'm experiencing and some other people experience it as well. You can buy nib replacements, so maybe I should do that, but honestly, I'm not going to really put any more effort into trying to get these to work for me unless they come out with some kind of different nib. So overall, I think these markers have great potential. They're definitely onto something here. I think acrylic markers are popular for a reason. They're just so convenient, and I think they would pair really nicely with their alcohol markers. I just personally think the nib needs some improvement, or maybe it's the ink itself that dries too quickly in the nib. I think maybe a felt tip nib would be a nice option. I'm wondering if I could put other nibs inside these markers, like if I could get it from a different brand and swap them out. I wonder if that would fix the problem. If any of you have tried these markers, please let me know your experience with them. If you found a problem with the ink getting clogged and stuck, or if they worked perfectly for you, I would love to hear. This is just what I experienced when I was trying to use them on watercolor paper, but they went a lot better on a smooth surface. So that's all I really have to say in regards to the Copic Acrea markers. I wanted to love them, I just don't. I should also mention that I used some pencil crayon near the end. I decided to just throw all my rules out the window for this piece. I was getting really tired of just using acrylic markers over and over and over and coloring the same thing over and over and over. So I used some pencil crayon just to bring this one to a more elevated, finished look. Next up is the Arrtx 36 colors. It's their acrylic paint markers brush tip direct liquid ink set. I really like this set. I think the barrels are super cute because they have smiley faces all over them and it just makes me happy to use them. The nib holds up pretty well, which is consistent with the other Arrtx ones that I try, but the difference with these ones is that there's a lot more ink in the barrel, so I am already on board with these compared to the other ones. I just wish they came in more colors. I would love a 90 set of this type of Arrtx marker. I think that would be my ideal marker along with the Ohuhu Nahuku ones. I would compare these to those. I think they are similar. They don't have that weird leaking problem though, and I'm not sure which has more ink inside, honestly. The price of these is $50.99 Canadian dollars or $36.99 USD, which is about $1 per marker. So not so bad. I like the color selection. Again, they're missing really dark colors and also like super pastels. The super light colors and super dark colors are really hard to come by in the cheaper acrylic marker sets. I like the brush tip on these. I like the fact that you shake the marker because that means there's liquid ink inside, which is great. Comparing these to the Ohuhu Nahuku set, They don't have as strong of a chemical smell, if that's something that is important to you. I'd say these smell more like a chalky smell. The Ohuhu ones are a little more of like a chemically smell. And I wouldn't say like any of the markers are that stinky. It's only if you put your nose close to them while you're using them. And like most brush tip acrylic markers, they will start off very pointy and wear out over time. I would say these markers, the Ohuhu markers and the Enmi markers, are all similar in terms of their brush nib. I just find that the Tooli brush nib wears out a lot faster than them. That being said, I did find the Enmi brush tip was not as easy to get fine details as the Arrtx and Ohuhu markers, which is interesting because I feel like the nib still held up decently well, but for some reason just not as easy to get fine details. When I'm comparing the final piece of the Arrtx shake markers and the Ohuhu Nahuku, you can definitely tell that the Arrtx piece looks a little more pale and chalky, and the Ohuhu one looks a little more colorful and vibrant. I think that just comes down to the color selection that's available. I think it would be great if this marker range could come out with a lot more colors and eventually expand to 90 and beyond. The one main limiting factor in most acrylic marker sets is the fact that you can't really mix your own colors. I mean, you kind of can. You can blend on the canvas. Like you can put down one color, then add a different color to it and sort of blend it with the color that's already on the page. But at the end of the day, you're pretty much limited to the colors that are inside the barrel. It's not like normal paint where you can mix your own color on a palette on the side. You kind of have to work with what they've given you. And I do think this set has a nice color range. It just is missing some of the darker saturated colors. For the darkest areas, like I just really needed more contrast, and the only way I could accomplish that was by adding pure black, and I colored over it with brown just to like soften it up. The black is a little bit too intense compared to the rest of the colors. It's just so much darker than them. So I wish there were some colors that sort of bridge the gap between black and all these like pale, colorful blues and reds and greens. And you can probably see that the light colors are not completely opaque because as I'm coloring over top of my sketch, you can kind of see through it. I don't mind this so much because it allows you to color on a sketch while still seeing your sketch lines on the first layer. And then you can go back in and go over your lines and add shading. So it's sort of a blessing in disguise at times if you want to be able to see what's underneath your painting, but other times you just want a nice opaque color. I feel like pretty much all of the sets don't have a super opaque white. It varies a bit, but the white isn't that opaque, except for with the Copic Acrea. I find that is very opaque, and also with the Molotow markers, which I'll be talking about later. Those are the two I find the most opaque. But like I said, I do enjoy this pack. I think the ink system is a big upgrade from the regular Arrtx markers, the very first set I tried in this video. I like the huge color range in the 90 set. I think I enjoyed using those colors the most out of all these packs just because there's so many of them. It's easier when you have such a variety of colors to work with. However, those markers don't have the most ink in them, so these ones are great because they do have a lot more ink inside of them. So that's pretty much all I have to say about this Arrtx pack. I want to keep my eye out for this system and see if they release new colors for it because I just much prefer the loose ink instead of the ink being in a sponge. And I just like when there's a lot more ink included in the marker because you're just getting better value and the color doesn't dry up so fast when you're trying to color in a large area because the ink is like always flowing down into the nib. So I do enjoy this set. I would recommend it if you like the color range, and I've just found it generally pretty easy to get finer details. None of these pieces are super extremely polished because I had to do them over and over and over, but you kind of get a general sense of how they behave by seeing me work with them. So that's all for the Arrtx shake markers. And I call them the shake markers because they're the ones you have to shake. This next set is an interesting one. It's by Ohuhu, and there are 24 different colors inside the pack, but there are 48 markers. So this means each color has 2 markers. One of them is a fine nib, and the other is a bullet point nib, or it can be a chisel tip. You can take the nib out and flip it around and choose which end you'd like to use. which is pretty cool. So the set is $34.99, which is $1.46 per color, and each color has 2 markers to go with it, so it's sort of like 73 cents per marker, but that's keeping in mind that there are only 24 colors, not 48 colors. Because this set only has 24 colors, it did feel a little bit limiting, but I found the colors to be pretty opaque. I think it's because of the bullet nib. It's just easier to get a thicker layer of paint with these types of nibs. I really like the felt tip big bullet nib on the larger marker. I just find it's really easy to get a consistent lay down of ink. It's really easy to prime the nib. I just find that they work very consistently. And the smaller nib is that plasticky one, sort of the same as the Copic Acrea, but I did not have the clogging issue with these Ohuhu markers. I just feel like the plasticky nibs work better for smooth surfaces, and I'm not really using the smoothest surface. I like that the Ohuhu markers always come with 2 different swatching papers. One is black and one is white, so you can really see how opaque each color is. And that's pretty cool. They're not trying to like hide how opaque their markers are. They want you to get a sense of it right away, so you're not like surprised later if a certain color is not as opaque as you'd want it to be. So I think that's pretty cool that they include both types of swatches. So you can see some footage here of me priming a bunch of the markers. I wanted to show you it in real time, but I also sped some of the clips up because it can take a while for the ink to reach the nib, but really not that long. I'd say like 20 seconds, 10 seconds. The fine tip nibs get primed very quickly and easily, and the felt tip ones take a little bit of extra time because the ink has to fully absorb into the felt, whereas the plastic one, they sort of just like fill the plastic and run down. Like I said, the plasticky nibs, I didn't have as much of a hard time using them as the Copic Acrea ones. Despite using mixed media paper, the plasticky nibs were actually pretty usable and I like them, so Ohuhu is doing something right with that. This set also comes with 2 metallic colors, a silver and a gold. So that's already taking away from the usable color range because I don't really use silver and gold in my art. And you can kind of see on the black swatches that the colors are not 100% opaque, but it gives you an idea of how opaque they are. They were opaque enough for me. And what I loved about the bullet nib on the big marker is that there's so much ink inside of it that it's really easy to cover large areas. I didn't feel like the marker was constantly drying up like I do with the ones that have a cotton core. Ohuhu does sell ones that have cotton cores, kind of like the Arrtx 90 set, that like standard Arrtx set that I tried at the beginning. That one uses cotton to hold the ink inside, but these Ohuhu ones are free flowing ink, which is my favorite type of acrylic marker, as I've said. I actually really enjoy the final result of this set. Despite not having a lot of dark colors, I utilized one of the darker colorful blues and used that as the darkest color in my shadows, and it gave it a really nice effect. It's sort of like a different style or like color palette than the rest of them, but there's just something really nice about having the fine tip nib and the wide nib. I think having a fine tip nib gave this one a lot of polish and it feels a little more complete than some of the other ones where I had more trouble getting into the fine details and I felt like I was constantly coloring over areas and overstepping the boundaries of where the color should be and then having to fix it. So having these small nibs was a joy to work with. I actually really enjoyed having that as an option. Do they need to be 2 separate markers? I think there's an argument that it's a good idea to have them in 2 separate markers because you're not dealing with a double-ended marker and you're not like fighting with making sure that the ink is flowing to both ends of the marker equally. This way, you only have one end of the marker where the ink needs to flow and you don't need to like sort of flip it back and forth and like the ink might flow downwards. So I just really enjoyed having the fine nib that actually works. It would have been really nice to have a fine nib with the Copic Acrea, but if I had to color this entire thing with just the fine nib, I think I would want to pull my hair out because it would just take too long to fill in the big areas. So having the option of the thicker marker was really nice for filling in those large areas. It just felt like a really nice workflow. Honestly, this set is very usable because of the 2 nib size options. And I just wish they would release more colors. I'm sounding like a broken record at this point, but we need more colors. We need dark colors. We need a wider color selection in pretty much all of these kits, except for Tooli has a lot of colors and Arrtx. I think they're up to 120 now, which is pretty cool. It'd be cool to try that out one day, and I'm gonna have to find somewhere to donate or give away my old marker sets, just the ones where there's no way I'm gonna use them all. I feel like they should go to a better home if I end up trying out some of these larger sets, which is also why I think it would be a great idea to sell individual markers. I love when brands have individual colors available, because if you run out of one color, you want to be able to just replace that one color. You don't want to have to buy an entire new set just to replace one color, because you're going to end up with too much of the colors that you already have, and it's just not the most economically sound way to do things. Arrtx actually sells individual markers, but only for their main set, the same markers as the 90 set and those 60 sets that you see people use on social media. Ohuhu does not have single acrylic markers available. They only have single alcohol markers. So I think more companies should definitely get on the single marker bandwagon. It's just so nice to be able to replace a couple of colors that ran out. The set that we will be reviewing after this one is the Molotow marker set, and they sell individual markers and refills. I think refills are amazing because then you're not like throwing out a bunch of markers. It sort of reduces plastic, and it's just really convenient and usually more cost effective to have refills. But the Molotow markers are more expensive than all the markers on this list. You'll see when we get there. So all in all, I really enjoyed this Ohuhu set. If you don't like brush nibs, this might be the set for you. One thing I wanted to mention about the plasticky nibs is that sometimes they splatter if you're not really like doing a smooth stroke and you kind of like hit some friction. The paint will sort of splatter outside of the nib. I didn't have a huge problem with that, but I did notice it on the swatching card that the white one splattered a little bit. That's one thing to keep in mind, but otherwise, it's a pretty solid set. Now, last but not least, the Molotow markers. I used to say Molotow, but I learned that it's Molotow. They are quite expensive. I would put these in the professional category if you're really looking to do some professional, long-lasting artwork and you want some nice, opaque, like solid quality colors. I think this is the pack for you. I decided to get a humble pack of 20. It's the one for all markers, the 127HS kit number 2. It's $120.99 Canadian dollars, which is $86.65 US dollars, or $4.33 per marker. Now, are they worth this price? I feel like they are for professionals. They also have refills, which is 30 milliliters of ink. And I believe the markers have an 8 milliliter capacity. So you can refill the markers about 4 times, almost 4 times. The refills are $9.42 USD. You can also get a large refill that has 180 milliliters inside. And those ones cost about $25.69 USD. And for a marker with an 8 milliliter capacity, you can refill it 22.5 times if the refill is 180 milliliters. So I feel like that's a much better deal. That's like $1 per refill, but you have to have that initial investment of paying like $25 for the refill. So I guess you would do that for the colors that you use most often. So it's a little more expensive than the marker, but you get a lot of refills out of it. And I'm doing the black paper test here, and it's pretty opaque, but it's also being absorbed into the paper. So I did a little test on a more smooth surface, and you can see it's pretty opaque there. So your mileage may vary depending on the type of paper that you're using, but overall I found these to be pretty solid. You can also buy nib replacements, you can buy empty markers and mix your own colors with their refills and create your own customized marker colors, which is super cool. They come in a lot of different types of nibs. I wish I got the thinner ones because I had a hard time getting details and I didn't have enough colors to do these justice, honestly, but I really enjoyed using them because of how opaque they are and how juicy they are. They just feel very reliable. I wasn't the biggest fan of their super fine nibs. They worked pretty well. I just found that they splattered a little bit, only if you're drawing in one direction and then you kind of like switch directions or like go around a curve. If it meets some sort of friction, sometimes it splatters. These are by far the most customizable set on this list, seeing how you can actually buy empty markers and make your own colors. And for the empty markers, they have a bunch of different nibs and sizes to choose from. There's a 2mm nib, a 4mm nib, a 4 to 8mm because it's a chisel tip, a wide nib that's 15mm, There's also a gigantic one that's called 60 millimeters high flow. There's a 1 millimeter brush, a 2 millimeter chisel, the double-ended marker. There's just so many different options. You can probably find a method that works for you. I'm really interested to try their brush tip marker because I found sometimes that the bullet nib was a little too rough for my paper, but as far as I can tell, I don't think you can buy acrylic markers from them with a brush nib. I think the only brush nibs are more like ink-based ones, like alcohol markers or water-based markers. I can't find a way to get a brush nib acrylic marker from them. And I don't know if the empty barrel with the brush nib is meant for acrylic markers or if it's meant for their other types of ink. I wish I could get a brush nib from them with acrylic ink because then it wouldn't be so harsh on the type of paper that I like to use. That's sort of a problem that I experience with some bullet nib acrylic markers, that they're not as gentle as the brush nib and they can rip up the paper a little bit if you have weaker paper or if the area is already wet and saturated and you're scrubbing over it, it might rip up the paper. I found that Posca markers did this worst of all. Posca markers are not on this list just because I feel like they're so widespread and so well known, and I personally am not a fan of them. I didn't want to buy another set because I bought the Molotow set myself. Most of the other sets were gifted to me, but I bought these because I didn't think I would be able to get them gifted because they're so expensive and I don't really see them doing promotions. So another great thing about Molotow is that they have actual dark colors. I feel like they have the darkest colors available out of all these markers, which is amazing. I was able to get a really dark green. It's called Future Green to be my outlines and my darkest color, which was really nice to work with. And I actually found a refill for that one in a thrift store, a restore, because one of the Curry's art supply stores near me closed down, so they donated a bunch of their supplies to restore. If I were to buy these again, I would probably get the twin markers because you get 2 types of nibs in one marker. I think that's really good value. I was missing getting finer details. The final result of this one looks a lot different from the rest of them just because the color range is so different from the other packs, which I think is actually a cool thing that there's some color variety here, because I find with a lot of the other acrylic marker packs, a lot of the colors they offer are very similar to each other, but I feel like with the Molotow set, you can actually get some pretty unique colors, and they have a large color range of like 75-ish acrylic markers you can get. Make sure you store them horizontally. I accidentally stored mine tip up because that's sort of how the package is. It was an accident because that's not how you're supposed to store markers, but the ink kind of separated. And make sure you give them a good shake before every use. I would definitely recommend these markers, especially if you're going to use them on a smoother surface. I think the ink quality is really great. I love the customizability and how you can make your own colors. I think that's great. I wish I got to try a lot more colors, but I couldn't really afford grabbing so many different ones, but maybe in the future. So overall, I would give these 2 thumbs up. Now, for the final comparison, the final verdict, honestly, I think all of these sets have their own uses. I would recommend the Molotow markers if you're looking to really get into acrylic markers and you want some quality stuff and you want something very customizable and you want to save money on refills. If you're going to be doing large scale pieces, they would probably be the most cost effective, but they don't have brush nibs for the acrylic markers. I think the way the Molotow painting turned out though is probably my least favorite just because I did not have the proper colors to make the drawing that I wanted to make, so it kind of like sticks out like a sore thumb, despite me actually really liking the markers and wishing I had a better color range and smaller nibs to realize this painting a bit better. I would recommend the Arrtx 90 set just because there's so much color variety. There's not tons of ink in the markers, but I really enjoyed the color variety. I really like their nibs. They hold up pretty well. I'm an overall fan of the Arrtx markers. I just wish there was more ink inside of them, which is why you should consider the Arrtx markers that you shake. Hopefully they come out with more colors soon. I think the Arrtx liquid ink markers, the ones you have to shake, are one of my favorites on this list. Just looking back at like all of the paintings, I think I was able to get like the most crisp details with them. The only problem is the available colors. If they come out with more colors for this, I will be so sold on them. I'd have to try them out first, but I would just love if they came out with a wider color variety, like do the exact same colors as their 90 set, but do them in this ink system, I think that would be perfect. I think both of the Ohuhu sets were pretty solid, honestly. The Enemy markers weren't bad, but I found their nibs not as easy to get fine details. And the Tooli set, I do not like their brush nibs, but I do like their bullet nibs. And Tooli is very interesting to me because of how many colors they claim to have, like over 400 different colors. I don't know how different they all are. It would be really interesting to get every single color and compare them and see like just how many colors they have. But Tooli is very interesting to me because you can buy a purple set, a green set, a red set, like every single color they have a set of all the lights and darks and different hues. So I think that's pretty cool. I would just steer clear of their brush nibs unless they make a change, or if you're going to be working on extremely smooth paper, there'll be less of a risk of the nib getting beat up. Mine could have fallen apart just because of the watercolor paper that I chose to use. I would probably steer clear of the Copic Acrea. I think it has good ink. It was the most frustrating experience out of all of them, and I wouldn't recommend them, unfortunately. Some people might have a great experience with them. I think they go well on top of smooth paper for adding detail to alcohol, marker illustrations, or any type of really smooth surface. I would not recommend them for paper at all. I had a really hard time using them on normal paper, but I got them to work on marker paper, which is a smooth paper surface. And don't pick your favorite set based on which artwork is your favorite. It's more about the process and all the things that I talked about while using each set, because some of them don't look as nice as the others, but I would probably recommend that set over some of the others. Like for instance, the Molotow set, I didn't have the proper color range to really do this illustration, but I do think they are a worthwhile set to look into, especially if you just want to buy like individual acrylic markers and you only want like certain colors. So all of these sets have their pros and cons. I'd be very interested to hear which set or brand you are most likely leaning towards in the comments, taking into account how you're going to be using these markers, what your budget is, what colors you need, how much customizability do you want them to have. I'm very interested to hear what people think sounds the best to them after watching this video. I started this video months ago. It's taken me a really long time to make because there's just so much involved in it, but I hope you appreciate the data that I have provided. Let me know which set is your favorite, if you tried any of these sets, if you have any tips for solving some of the issues that I came across. I really hope this video was useful. It took a long time to make, and maybe in a future video I will compare some new brands that I didn't get around to doing in this one, because there are a lot of acrylic marker brands. I feel like they're popping up all over the place these days, and there's some that aren't even available in North America that look really promising, so I might have to see how I can get my hands on them. But for now, I'm going to take a break from drawing a mourning dove over and over and over and use some other kind of art supply. I really hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for sticking around till the end, and I will see you in the next video. Okay, actually I have a really quick clip at the end here that I wanted to show you. It's a white marker test for each brand. So I took some black paper and just used the white markers just to see how opaque they are on a slightly absorbent black paper surface. And some of them stood out as being quite good, and some of them are not so good. So I hope you'll enjoy seeing that. Again, thanks for watching.